Good afternoon.
How are you?
I'm glad. I'm good, man. How are you doing?
Doing wonderful, doing wonderful.
Good.
And let me say to our folks again, welcome to Mental Health Mondays, brought to you by Saving Grace Community Church and Grace House, Cincinnati. Also joining us today, we are very excited to have with us Leo Cauldron, who is chairman of the board for Esperanza of Northern Kentucky. All right, very good. And we're very excited to have you gentlemen here with us as we tackle a very important subject. We have been dealing with the subject, the real on racism, and we will be dealing with that topic for the rest of the month. Tonight in particular, we want to focus in on what's behind stereotypes. Stereotypes are like, I would say, the fact that everyone has ears, everyone has noses. They're common to everybody. But what's critical for me and for everyone else is how those stereotypes affect us in our daily interactions with each other. I might ask, beginning with you, Dr. Moss, to provide us, based on your experience, how you would define a stereotype.
Again, thanks for allowing me to be with you guys tonight. I would define stereotypes as assigning a beliefs, characteristics, assumptions on lifestyle, assigning that to a particular group. That could be a group based upon age. It could be a group based upon ethnicity or gender. But it's really about having having an assumption, really, of that particular group, which really may not be based on any facts at all.
Leo?
Well, for me, it's very simple. It's having these perceptions about, just like the Moss mentioned, certain perceptions of groups of individual, and not really looking into why is it that they don't seek mental health. In other words, we need to go beyond that. And oftentimes it's because of the lack of knowledge, of understanding who these people are, or who that subgroup may be, who lives in our backyards, in our community.
That's critical. One of the reasons why I invited you on, Leo, is that because traditionally in our country, when we deal with the subject of race, we always look and focus our attention on the race relations between African Americans and white society. But in fact, as you look at the myriad of races that make up our great country, there are more relations that we need to explore. And you mentioned something in general, you talked about a subgroup. Can you elaborate a little more about that?
Sure. Reverend Phillips, you and I go back a long time, and I just met Dr. Moss this evening. But I've been part of this community for over 40 years. I grew up in the south side of Chicago, came to study at Thomas More College. So this is home. For me, it's home, But if I was to say for the last 20 years, Latinos, we have been the largest minority group in the United States, in the greater Cincinnati, just like you alluded a while ago about this black and white view in the greater Cincinnati, like there's no other ethnic groups live in the greater Cincinnati. And I think that's the perception that we may have. But our greater Cincinnati is rich with diversity. And again, it's understanding who is it that lives in those communities to better serve them, whether it'll be higher education, career opportunities for these children who maybe want to one day pursue a career in psychiatry and social work or whatever the case may be, again, to better serve our growing diverse community. So it's education. It's education. It's education.
Dr. Boss, in your practice,
Yeah.
you minister to, you treat patients from various backgrounds.
Mhm.
And we alluded and we spoke a little bit about this last week. How important is it for you as a medical profession to make sure that as your diverse patients are treated with an understanding of the background in which they come from?
It's very important. We want to be able to provide customized care, to be able to meet the exact needs of that individual. And, we can have some understanding of, what care is like across communities, but I really need to understand that individual story. What is the story? What is their narrative that's gotten them to this place in their health? And I would like to learn more about their culture. I want to know more about their family of origin, but even within their culture, they've had their own individual path within that. And it's our job as mental health providers to be able to understand that. And it gives us context by which I can treat someone's depression or anxiety, hopefully relying less and less on these assumptions and being able to appreciate that person's individual narrative and how they got to where they are.
Yeah, that's critical, especially in a medical profession, to understand the various cultures, because depending upon what your country of origin is or your community in which you're involved in, would even shape how you interact with the medical profession. Would you say that to be true, Leo?
Absolutely. All of that. I wish we could practice more holistic medicine in which we treat the patient as a whole. And like some other countries do, Mexico does that quite nice in terms of, touching the patient and ask them on the shoulder and say, how are you today, Juan? How are you, Rose? And basically that kind of ease, if a client has, doesn't like to go to the medical, how could you ease the pain and all of that stuff. So all of that, the way you communicate, and also too, again, you need to understand who that patient is. Dr. Mas mentioned that earlier, and be cognizant of that. And I think that's where the cultural competence comes in place. But I tell you what, what I was talking before about education, it's just simple. I guess, it's if we're going to go and promote services, whether it be medical, healthcare, mental health, what kind of brochures do we have in place to provide that to our clients? And again, and again, in the language that they need to go in and have. But again, those are the kinds of things. The website is the website in different languages, depending on those where those clients are coming from. But when it comes to mental health, there's a huge need. There's a huge need for bilingual, in this case, for bilingual psychiatrists, psychologists, and social workers. The other day, a couple of weeks ago, I received a phone call in which this mother was looking for bilingual counseling service. And the question is, who do you of course, we have agencies such as Sucasa Center in Cincinnati, and now we have Esperanza in Northern Kentucky. But it's that's been a problem. And again, it starts with elementary, high school. And when we talk about career opportunities, are those careers, are we promoting those career opportunities? And if so, how are we going to increase those professionals in those professions that is badly needed? So, yeah.
Well, one of the challenges that we see, particularly within the African American community, and maybe you found it to be similar within the Latino community. How are Latinos generally? How do they respond to the idea of seeking mental health?
Well, that's somewhat challenging at times. And I think it's a combination of education. How are we promoting that? In a way, all of us are seeking help or consulting with others, whether it will be in a formal way or an informal way. The informal way would be, getting together with other, with other individuals in an informal social setting. Okay, you share your concerns and all that, but how could we seek professional counseling? And there's certain I guess cultural barriers that exist, but understanding that it's for people like me who are Mexicans, we have this thing. Well, we don't want to go and go to counseling because that means that you have to go and share your yes with others, and but again, through education we could alleviate and address some of these issues, and again by having Mexican American social workers or whatever the case may be that can better serve that community. And whether it'll be other people from the Middle East or whatever the case, the African American community and so on. So again, it's seeing some of their own in those positions that can address their own unique challenges they may have.
Dr. Moss, hearing that, how would you respond to Leo's comments? And secondly, could you give us an idea or help us to understand how stereotypes are really formed?
Yeah. In listening to Mr. Calderon, I would echo everything that he says. And from the medical establishment, I think in being able to reach, various cultures and communities, you have to be intentional. Meaning that it has to be a part of your mission. It can't be a thing where I'm just going to make sure that my doors are open wide and whoever wants to come in wants to come in. It actually begins with, being able to speak with community stakeholders, having conversations with them, trying to understand the community. It also takes an investment in hiring the right people on your team, even as something as simple who can speak the same language. That very simple thing can become such a barrier or a conduit in which you get folks to care. And then trying to find ways that you can customize your interventions. If I'm doing group therapy, if I'm doing medication management, how much of the family needs to be involved in that discussion. It may vary depending on the type of culture that exists. And when we think about the Spanish speaking culture, it is very diverse. Very diverse, and trying to understand all of those nuances. So it takes effort. It takes not just having your doors open and having the ability to treat, but it takes trying to make the effort to understand the culture and then the investment in people and sometimes money to assure that you can address those needs when they come. So that's how our start with the first thing. Now, how do we develop stereotypes? I think that we all create stereotypes, even as a young child. As a young child, we are trying to understand a very complex world. We see people who are tall, who are short, people who are old and who are young, and people who are dark colored and people who are light colored. And we're trying to put them in very simple categories so that we can understand. And then it's our environment and our upbringing, which then tends to color that or reinforce that. So our family, with our parenting, their opinions, their behaviors, set against these categories that we're trying to create. Our peer group, right? What we see in the media, all of those things can create false narratives about these categories that we tend to build. And then over time, we start to have interaction with groups, And that can sometimes negatively reinforce some of these behaviors that we have, in addition to what we may see in the media. But research shows that when we have less interaction with other groups, we have a greater tendency to create these stereotypes. So if I never have conversations with someone who is from the western part of the continent of Africa, if I never have conversations with someone who may be of Middle Eastern descent, I'm more likely to develop stereotypes or false beliefs or assumptions about that group, particularly if there is a negative narrative that already exists in the media and society about that group.
So the challenge seems to be, and I might direct this question to Mr. Carter Leo, within your fabric of your culture, certain stereotypes are maintained about other people from different races or groups. How do you challenge those within your community to readjust their thinking if they feel as though that the majority of folks have a negative and unrealistic view about themselves, of them?
You know, I think what's going to really take is for, you know, the priests to be involved, the pastors to be involved, the teachers in the community leaders, people who are in leadership positions to explain to the community whatever we're trying to convey to the community. If it's mental health, we need to go ahead and have educational programs, I believe, in those communities in which we could go invite the community to go and join us to discuss this particular mental health. If it's mental health, to discuss the issue of mental health and how is that affecting our communities, okay? And have bilingual, in this case, having an understanding, just like Dr. Moss alluded before. You know, our community is extremely diverse. We come from, you know, over 20 different Latin American countries, okay? So we're not all Mexicans, we're not all Puerto Ricans, we're not all Cubans, okay? So we need to go and understand who is it that we're coming from, where we're coming from, or who are we descendant of, you know? And again, bringing in the priests, bringing in the school teachers, and having those tailored sessions for that community to help navigate the system. In the Latino community, the immigration issue is a big issue. Understanding the legal status of some of those community. Are they eligible for those services? They're not. What are some of the programs that are eligible for them as well? A lot of times it's not because we in the Latino community, we do not want to seek out those services. It's a matter of, are we presenting that information to our Latino community? And that's where I think we have a broken system. Whether you're talking about higher education, mental health, legal, or whatever, we're not presenting that information in the fashion that this community can understand. Dr. Moss also alluded to the investment. You know, we need to invest. We need to go in. It's okay to go ahead and say this particular agency provides these psychological services, but then when I show up, guess what? They don't have anybody who's bilingual. Guess what? They don't have bilingual. They may have one social worker or psychiatrist or psychologist, but do they have enough? But those are the kinds of things. Those are the bigger questions that we need to go and ask ourselves. If we're promoting something, do we have enough staff to provide those services to them? And I think that in many cases it's not. And we need to go and invest in educating, our population, our underrepresented population. Dr. Moss, if you were to count the number of psychiatrists, minority psychiatrists in the greater Cincinnati, how many would that be? Is that enough to provide services to our community? And what is the percentage of community members that are seeking that assistance? Obviously, and not enough. And the question is, Is there a need for to improve that? Absolutely, yes.
But even that can shape our stereotype, in terms of knowing that if you bought in the fact that you needed help, that you were having some mental issues and you needed some help, even that's a stereotype that someone might have, that once they go to get help, there's no one that can relate to them. So we all agree that stereotypes, if left unchecked, can lead to folks having some bad experiences. It can lead to some things that are never positive in our relationships. Here's just a few folks who are that we talked to about how stereotypes what stereotypes they've experienced and how they've been affected by it.
Hey, y'all know Black people like fried chicken and watermelon, right?
Common stereotypes that I've experienced is just because I'm a Black woman, some people think I'm too sassy or come off as sharing my opinion.
Nah, but for real, I thought everybody liked fried chicken and watermelon.
I've experienced white privilege. I have witnessed racism among close contacts, coworkers, and close friends.
Being aggressive, which is not necessarily the case.
I've been profiled. I was messing around in public with my white college friends, and a cop pulled me out of the group.
They have a hard time being receptive to Black women and how we show up in a room and how we voice ourselves.
Growing up, my dad told me something that sticks with me to this day. I gotta work twice as hard to get half the recognition. That's not lost on me.
I believe that we can overcome stereotyping by admitting that we are all human.
What is your reaction to that, Leo? And how can you pick up on terms of what are some of your experiences as a Latino in facing racism and being stereotyped and profiled even?
I think part of that is, again, there's not enough interaction that is taking place. Oftentimes we have this view that, oh, I'm not racist, or, I treat everybody the same. But then, if I was to ask the question, is that if so, do you have any Latino friends? Well, not really, it's wait a minute, you cannot have it both,
Right.
So again, and I think part of that also too is the lack of representation in the employment. If we were to have, when you look at the percentage of Latinos and African Americans, I would think that about 25% of the population easily is Latino and African American. And we represented it in the workforce as professionals, and I think by having a certain percentage of representation in those communities, that would ease out the because you may have one Latino in a department or the institution or in the agency, but I think if you were to have more, diversity. I think within your colleagues, you would challenge each other. You would probably address some of those issues, and that would not be a shock.
Mr. Calderon, I would echo that. And there's one place where we probably need to look a lot more closely at representation among various ethnic groups, and that's the local school boards.
Yeah.
Because the local school boards, make the decisions about what's taught.
Right.
What textbooks are there? What's in the history that's shared?
Wow.
What are the priorities for how we demonstrate culture and the arts? And all of those things are very important for us to be able to have, exposure to something that does not look like us. And that is that's a big premise in trying to erase these stereotypes, is to increase the exposure to people who do not look like us. And as you get into larger metropolitan areas where there's greater diversity, we have less, not eradicated, but we have less issues when it comes to racism and stereotyping, is when we get into communities that are more homogeneous. They're just a single color, and we don't have exposure to each other. And that's where we have these great risks.
Well, the challenge becomes is sharing with folks and saying, I know that you're comfortable in your own skin and in your own community, but some would argue, well, what's wrong with that? Why should I forge ahead and develop new relationships outside my group? And they hold that and maintain that. Go ahead, Leo.
Yeah. If I could also add on Dr. Moss's, feedback, but also too, we need to go ahead and, there's this perception, there's this view that they cannot identify qualified candidates to fill those positions. You hear this, and we need to move beyond that. Those comments in today's age, I find them somewhat unreasonable and somewhat even offensive, because we do have qualified individuals to meet. The question is that environment, is that a positive environment for people to grow and fulfill their dreams and fulfill their aspirations to do a good job in their field and in the community and so forth? So you need to create those spaces, that environment. I do believe that we have qualified individuals. The question is that how are we promoting? Who is it that is promoting those opportunities? What is the message? What is the message in the community? And that's the thing that we need to go and address. If I'm a CEO of a company, if I'm trying to promote opportunities, one of the first questions that I'm going to ask myself, what is the perception of the community? And how could I change that? What can I do to use some of the resources, whether it'll be promoting through the Spanish radio, the newspaper, identifying the leadership that is out there, and also, maybe go outside and meet this national organization such as the League of United Latin American Citizens, which is the equivalency of the NAACP for us. The League of United Latin American Citizens, and there's the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce locally under the leadership of Alfonso Cornejo. He's done a really good job in the business sector. Lula Su Casa, of course, they've been in existence for about 25, 30 years. So again, it's having that understanding and that investment that I keep going back, which again, Dr. Moss mentioned before.
You made a very, 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 very valid point. And segue really into we want to head next in conversation. Many institutions, businesses have the opportunity to diversify their work staff, but they will say there's not enough qualified candidates. And really, as we look at stereotypes, one of the byproducts of generalizations and stereotypes and biases, implicit or implicit, is the fact that we tend to discriminate, and we want our own group, our own group to stay with, and we feel as though that's the group that we need to stay with, and that's the group that's going to help us to get things done. But one of the things that stereotypes can lead to is discriminatory practices. And so when we think about stereotypes, we look in general how a stereotype may relate to a whole group of people. But then we know that there are subgroups. So I may have a view of a Hispanic, Mexican, or Latino, or African American, and I might say they're all this way. But then there's a subgroup. I may look at Black athletes different than white athletes. I may look at African American women different from African American men, and that's a transferable approach in terms of stereotypes that I think goes across the spectrum of all races. Would you agree, gentlemen?
Indeed, one of the premise of there's these various theories about racism, and one of those is that we will only identify with people who look like ourselves because we're trying to make sure that we hoard the resources and the opportunities, which in our mind we perceive to be little. So if there is what we perceive to be limited resources, we're naturally going to congregate against with people who look like us, who talk like us, and who act like us, so that we can make sure that we have those resources and such that other groups are not able to compete for that. So that's one of the premises of behaviors of racism.
Well, the challenge is that we make sure that we ourselves, because the way we are being stereotyped, that we don't buy into the stereotypes. And oftentimes a stereotype can be a self-fulfilling prophecy, and that if you're one in a room and someone looks and says, well, we know that you guys like to dance, well, come on, get up and dance for us. Or we know that you like to sing, come on and sing for us, entertain us. And someone who may have been victim of that type of stereotype may be reluctant to do it, but buy in and say, well, okay, since I'm the only one in the room, I'll do it. You were going to say, Leo?
Yeah, I mean, this is absolutely correct. I mean, all those, it amazes me how we have, strategic planning. If a company is, doing here is here, and we want to go in and increase our sales or whatever by 10, 15, 20%. If we wanted to go and grow physically, blah, blah, and add in more buildings and workforce and so on. So we have all this strategic planning, but when it comes to diversity, I yet to see a commitment, an investment to say this is where we are right now, and in 2 or 3 years, this is where we like to go and be. People say that, but are we holding these companies? Are they being held accountable to that? Genuinely increase their diversity. And oftentimes they fell short with that commitment. Some of us have looked at those diversity and said, wait a minute, why is it that we have not increased that percentage? Whether we're talking about the lack of faculty and staff in the greater Cincinnati universities, in boardrooms, in CEO positions, in public entities such as the Cincinnati Public School, but those are the I think it goes like this: policies. How are policies being implemented and introduced? And is that being representative of the community? Two, who is it that is involved in this policy? Okay. And the representation of those communities. If you look at research, the income gap between underrepresented groups and whites. I mean, there's that that gap is increasing the income, and in terms of healthcare, depending on where you live, what zip code do you live in? It's going to depend on your how healthy you are and so forth. So again, it's but you know what? I could only hope that things will get better, and I do feel that that the next generation will bring us to a better understanding. But yeah.
One final remark from you, Dr. Moss. Believe it or not, Leo, time goes fast when we're here. And so, one final remark from you, Dr. Moss.
I believe that that there's a long way for us to go in being able to move past stereotypes and even to continue to identify and battle this this illness of racism, and how we execute this with prejudices and stereotypes. But I do believe that our children are the key to moving this forward. And the sooner that we can bring diversity to our children, the sooner that we can speak truth to the history of this country and the countries that pour into what we know as the United States, the sooner we can speak truth to that and disseminate that information, I think that we create a healthier culture. Without that, we will continue to, unfortunately, live the lives and the detriment of our fathers.
Guys, it has been awesome. It has really been awesome. And Leo, I reserve the right to invite you back again to join us as we continue to move forward in our discussion in these days of enlightenment. And certainly, we join in with you and Dr. Moss and believing that better days are ahead for us as a people and for us as a nation. Despite what we saw occur on last Wednesday, we do believe this is the land of the free and the home of the brave. We do believe, as the founding fathers of this nation wrote in the Constitution, that each of us are born with inalienable rights, life, in liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And to that end, sometimes the challenge is for us to lay hold of those is because of racism and stereotypes that are attached to racist views and those who live and walk daily in bigotry. For those of our viewers, our guests, we thank you for taking time out on this Monday. Go Bucks to join us on this very important discussion. Until next week, we want to encourage you all to feel better, become better, and live better.